Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another daily news update for March 23rd, 2026. Today, we'll be talking a little bit about gold economy, what's happening with Africa and the UN, a Jewish and anti-Semitic attack in London, some ICE being deployed to U.S. airports, and an update on Iran. But let's start with the economy. Why gold's plunge into a bear market is a good signal for stocks, according to Morgan Stanley. Bullion's rise in previous months shows investors were wary of geopolitics, suggests Morgan Stanley strategist Mike Wilson. Written by Jamie Chisholm, published by MarketWatch. Before U.S. President Donald Trump sent markets rebounding with a message about good and productive conversations with Iran, traders had started the new week in a distinctly risk-off mood. Bullion had definitely not been behaving as a haven as the U.S.-Israel war with Iran rumbled on. At one point early Monday, NYMEX gold futures, GCOO, down 4.32%, fell as low as $4,100 an ounce, down an unusually large 10% on the session. Gold was down as much as 23% from its closing high, meeting the technical definition of a bear market. After Trump's post, the gold price recovered much of its early Monday losses, we should note. Analysts see two likely causes of the gold, and for that matter, silver, which is down 1.38% in sell-off. In the run-up to recent highs, precious metals had attracted a lot of individual investor speculation, with a surge of inflows into exchange-traded funds that track bullion. Wobbly markets are flushing out those gold and silver buyers. Mike Wilson, Morgan Stanley's chief U.S. equity strategist, cites another reason, that certain governments might be selling or need to sell some of their gold to pay for the higher price of oil and other commodities and or subsidies to their citizens. But whatever the cause of gold's decline, Wilson thinks it sends a positive signal for the stock market. If you accept that, longer term, the bullion price tends to be positively correlated with geopolitical and market angst. He looks at the ratio of the S&P 500 to gold price and finds that, even with the stock market's recent 6.8 slide from record highs, it has jumped dramatically of late as gold has fallen ever faster. Regular readers will recall our focus on gauge as a better measurement of what stocks are regularly discounting and the overall sustained health of an economy and corporate performance. It also correlates quite well with consumer confidence on a year-over-year basis and reflects the wide divergence between how people feel and the nominal price of the stock market that has confounded many, says Wilson. In other words, and to simplify, a higher S&P 500 gold ratio implies investors are more upbeat about stocks and not so concerned about the kinds of issues, inflation, deflation, geopolitical crises, that often boost bullion and vice versa. Those of a contrarian bent may thus consider a very high ratio to be a signaling equity investors are too sanguine, while a dive in the ratio may mean they are too pessimistic. When Wilson wrote his note, he observed that the S&P 500 to gold ratio had surged 12% since the conflict began 3 weeks ago. It would have been up even more given where S&P 500 and gold futures were trading early on Monday before Trump's message. Importantly, this new rally comes at the tail end of one of the most notable S&P 500 to gold ratio declines, suggesting markets are not complacent at all about geopolitical risks and concerns, he says. This ratio has historically bottomed when the U.S. commits more forcefully to a major military conflict, according to Wilson. Could we be witnessing the same dynamic at work today, he asks. The markets, U.S. stock indices, SPX up 1.2%, DJA up 1.41%, and Comp up 1.33%, are sharply higher after the Trump message as benchmark Treasury yields, 4.366%, reverse the course to trade lower. The dollar index, down 0.33%, is down, while oil prices, CL.1 is down 8.36%, plunged to trade around $89 a barrel. Synopsys shares, S&PS up 3.81%, are higher after the Wall Street Journal reported that activist investor Elliott Investment Management has built a multi-billion-dollar investment in the chip design software maker. U.S. lawmakers will push a bipartisan bill banning sports bets on prediction markets, according to the Journal report. U.S. economic data due Monday include the delayed report of construction spending for January, released at 10 a.m. Eastern. Fed officials making comments include Governor Stephen Miran, who told Bloomberg that the central bank should look to cut interest rates despite the recent surge in oil prices. Why is the dollar not rallying as much as might be expected during the war with Iran? After all, the US is likely to be one of the main energy producers to benefit from surging oil prices. One reason, according to George Saravelos, Dutch Bank Global Head of FX Research, is that the optimal policy response for Asia and the Middle East is to run down FX reserves and excess savings held in dollars to finance their higher import bills. The second, as the chart shows, is that interest rate differentials in this crisis are not moving in favor of the greenback. Central banks are moving in a hawkish direction much more quickly, he says, with the Bank of England, Bank of Japan, Riksbank, and European Central Bank all delivering hawkish press conferences last week. Here were the most active stock market tickers on MarketWatch as of 6 a.m. Eastern today. Nvidia, Tesla, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing all up, Micron Technology down, Super Microcomputer, GameStop, Advanced Micro Devices, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple all up. Next, we have the U.S.-Africa week ahead. Ghana's Mahama pushes for reparations at the UN. I fear I'm going to butcher a lot of these names, so please bear with me, but I will certainly try my best. John Mahama, U.S. Exim Bank, Uganda's Bobby Wine, and Zimbabwe's white farmers plead their case in Washington, written by Julian Pequet, published by the Africa Report. This week will see the U.S. play host to a series of debates salient to Africa's past, present, and future. The spotlight will be on the UN General Assembly, where Ghana's President John Mahama delivers on his promise during last year's high-level meetings week to have the world recognize the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade and rekindle the push for reparations. Mahama is expected to present his declaration of the trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. That is a long title for that. For consideration and adoption on Wednesday, the International Day of Remembrance for the Victims of Slavery in the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Kwame Nkrumah reminded us that political independence without transforming the global systems that shape our economies and opportunities remains incomplete, Mahama wrote in a 22 March op-ed in The Guardian. It is in that spirit that this month, Ghana will table a resolution at the United Nations General Assembly calling for the formal recognition of one of the greatest moral tragedies in human history, the transatlantic trafficking and enslavement of Africans as a crime against humanity, and the need for a process of repair. The previous day, the UN will host a high-level special event to discuss reparatory justice for the trafficking of enslaved Africans. The Donald Trump administration and other Western governments are expected to resist any calls for monetary compensation. Ghana is advancing the resolution in its capacity as the African Union's champion on reparations in collaboration with the Caribbean community and common market and people of African descent worldwide. If passed, this would be the first comprehensive resolution on the transatlantic slave trade in the nearly 80-year history of the UN. In other UN news, the Security Council on Thursday holds a briefing and consultation on MONUSCO, the UN stabilization mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC for short. The U.S. is presiding over the council this month, and former U.S. ambassador to the DRC, James Swan, has been appointed to lead the peacekeeping mission. U.S. Representative for UN Management and Reform Jeff Bartos visited the DRC, the Central African Republic, and Kenya last month to monitor and evaluate the UN missions in the DRC and CAR, MONUSCO and MINUSCA. The purpose of his engagements, he wrote on X, was how to make American contributions to peacekeeping and humanitarian assistance more focused and more effective in delivering impact on the ground. MONUSCO's budget has exceeded $1 billion annually for years. We must ensure every American taxpayer's dollar is focused on results, not bureaucratic overhead. Over in Washington, the right-leading Hudson Institute hosts members of the Southern African Agri-Initiative this morning for a pre-recorded online discussion of Zimbabwe's seizure of white farmers' land and the road to a resolution of the bilateral tensions it has engendered over the past 2 decades. Panelists include Dion Theron, who represents the Compensation Steering Committee group of former white farmers that rejected Harare's offer to compensate them with bonds last year, and Alan Markham, a former member of parliament from the opposition. Also on the panel is J.T. Tomaszewski, the top Africa hand for Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Jim Risch, a leading congressional critic of President Emerson Mnangagwa's human rights record. The panel comes as the White Farmers in December hired Trump-connected lobbying firm Mercury Public Affairs pro bono to expedite payments under the $3.5 billion compensation deal Mnangagwa approved in 2020. Over on Capitol Hill, U.S. Export-Import Bank President and Chairman John Jovanovic testifies before the Senate Banking Committee hearing Thursday morning as Congress begins to discuss reauthorization of the bank, whose operating authority expires in December. Panel member Kevin Kramer of North Dakota has introduced a 10-year bipartisan reauthorization as policymakers seek to modernize the agency to counter Chinese competition and support U.S. manufacturing jobs. Meanwhile, Ugandan pop star turned opposition leader Bobi Wine continues to urge the U.S. to stop propping up President Yoweri Museveni's 40-year rule. Wine turned up in Washington last week after evading capture for the past 2 months amid a political crackdown following January's flawed elections. After meeting on Capitol Hill last week, Wine is expected to meet with congressional staffers and elected members, as well as State Department officials and the broader think tank community. His lobbyist and friend, Jeffrey Smith of Vanguard Africa, tells the Africa Report. From Washington to California, New York to outer space, U.S. commercial diplomacy with Africa is in the spotlight this week. The State Department's senior Africa Bureau official, Nick Checker, offered the most detailed overview to date of America's First in Africa during last week's Powering Africa Summit, and more actors are responding to the call. The week kicks off with a delegation of executives from Egyptian construction and engineering firms visiting Washington and New York City today through Wednesday. Organized by U.S. lobbyist Riva Levinson's KRL International and Cairo-based M&P partners, the delegation aims to secure partnerships for U.S.-supported projects, particularly in critical minerals, transport corridors, power infrastructure, and regional economic integration. The visit aligns with Egypt's $500 billion Team Africa initiative to fund 300 development projects across the continent, Levinson explains. The delegation is expected to meet with the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, and the U.S. Export-Import Bank. It will be hosted by the Corporate Council on Africa in Washington and the Business Council for International Understanding, BCIU, in New York. No U.S. companies submitted expressions of interest for the Greenfield Railway connecting western Zambia to the Lobito Atlantic Railway, a primary export corridor for the subregion's critical mineral chains. Similarly, U.S. engagement has been absent for the Bishoftu Airport in Ethiopia, projected to be a major continental hub and metropolis, Levinson tells the Africa Report. By facilitating direct connections between regional firms and U.S. financial tools, we are seeking to close this gap. On Tuesday, the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, USTDA, hosts delegates from major African transmissions and distribution institutions seeking U.S. technology and expertise to meet their security and modernization priorities. The business briefing is part of a week-long USTDA West Africa Grid Security Reverse Trade mission that will also visit Philadelphia and New York. On Wednesday, attention shifts to California, where Eritrean-American Almez Negesh's African Diaspora Network hosts its annual African Diaspora Investment Forum through Friday in Santa Clara. This year's theme, Bridging Africa and Silicon Valley, Shaping the Future of Innovation, Investment, and Inclusive Growth. Priorities for this year include channeling bioscience discussions into ADN's Science Accelerator ahead of ADIS 27 in Africa, launching structured fintech and tech exploration, connecting African innovators with Silicon Valley's ventures, advancing diaspora investment policy. At last year's forum in Washington, ADN partnered with global grant maker Myriad USA to establish the African Diaspora Innovation Fund, AFDIF, an innovative investment model designed to channel charitable giving toward African and diaspora social entrepreneurs. A substantial African delegation is also expected at Saudi Arabia's Future Investment Initiative Forum, which runs from Wednesday through Friday in Miami. Back in Washington, U.S. military veterans Remy Adeleke and Daniel Archer host a Veterans for Africa interest meeting focused on economic resilience, security, and sustainable development. The meeting is sponsored by South African NGO For Africa and Adeleke's Small Farm Cities Africa initiative based in Malawi. Ugh. On Thursday, Nneka Achapu's Asha Strategies hosts the Skyward Africa Space Salon on the theme of Africa in Orbit, Space Power, Security, and Diaspora Talent. The keynote address will be delivered by Zolana Giao, General Director of Angola's National Space Program. Finally, Thursday through Saturday, DRC Minister of Youth and Patriotic Awakening Grace Coutinho is the guest of honor at the USA Africa International Conference on Cooperation and Investment. The conference is hosted by Patricia Seck's Africa Femmes Performance. Arms Control. Back on Capitol Hill, Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Thomas DiNanno is making the rounds. He'll appear before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Tuesday and the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Wednesday. On Thursday, the House Foreign Affairs Committee votes on a series of measures with implications for Africa. The markup is scheduled for March 4th. The measures include a bipartisan bill to tighten oversight of U.S. assistance to the continent and a Republican push to formally abolish the United States African Development Foundation, a 4-decade-old agency that offered grants and technical assistance to small businesses in Africa, most marginalized communities, and was an early victim of Trump's cost-cutting executive orders. Meanwhile, at the White House, First Lady Melania Trump and the State Department on Tuesday and Wednesday host leaders from 45 nations and 28 technology entities for fostering the future together. The First Lady's global coalition of nations aligned to empower children through education and technology. Member nations include Nigeria, Morocco, and Kenya. Namibia's First Gentleman, Epaphras Denga Ndatwa, is expected to ensure that Africa's boys don't get left behind, as in much of the rest of the world, boys in parts of Africa face higher dropout rates, lower enrollment, and poorer literacy and numeracy outcomes than girls. Over the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the executive board on Wednesday will discuss Cameroon following a staff visit last month to conduct the IMF's 2026 Article 4 consultation discussions. The mission focused on recent economic developments and the short and medium-term economic outlook. Next, we have an update on what's going on in London as a Jewish volunteer ambulance is set on fire in London in an apparent anti-Semitic attack. Written by Yulia Talmazan and Mithil Agarwal, published by NBC News. An arson attack on several ambulances from a Jewish volunteer service is being treated as an anti-Semitic hate crime, police in London said Monday. Authorities are searching for 3 suspects who appear to be seen in CCTV footage pouring accelerant onto the vehicles before igniting them and fleeing. The attack took place in Golders Green, a North London suburb that is home to several synagogues and dozens of Jewish schools and restaurants. Prime Minister Keir Starmer called it a deeply shocking anti-Semitic arson attack. It damaged 4 vehicles belonging to the volunteer organization in Hatzola Northwest, with multiple cylinders on the vehicles exploding, causing windows to break in nearby buildings, the London Fire Brigade said in a statement. The police also said they were aware of explosions linked to the gas canisters on board the ambulances. No arrests have been made and no one was injured, police said. Social media videos verified by NBC News showed massive flames rising from the ambulances as they burned, with the fire sending up thick plumes of smoke. Another video showed an explosion erupting as firefighters worked to douse the flames. While it has not been declared an act of terrorism at this stage, the investigation is now being led by counter-terrorism policing. Metropolitan Police Detective Chief Superintendent Luke Williams said, "We are aware of an online claim from a group taking responsibility for this attack. Establishing the authenticity and accuracy of this claim will be a priority for the investigation team, but it is not something we can confirm at this point," he added without naming the group. The fire brigade said it received the first of 56 emergency calls around 1:40 a.m., 9:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time Sunday, and dispatched 6 fire engines, around 40 firefighters to the scene. The fire was brought under control shortly after 3 a.m. local time, it said. Nearby houses have been evacuated as a precaution, but the 34 residents have been displaced, have not returned to their homes, police said. A policing plan focused on key community locations across the area is underway, Williams said, and will continue beyond the coming days as we move toward Passover, a major Jewish holiday in early April. "My thoughts are with the Jewish community who are waking up this morning to this horrific news," Starmer said in a post on X. "Anti-Semitism has no place in our society. Anyone with any information must come forward to the police." Hatzola Northwest was established as a nonprofit organization in 1979 to provide free emergency medical services to residents of North London. According to its website, it works closely with national emergency services in area hospitals and responds to thousands of calls a year, from minor injuries to life-threatening conditions. Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis said the arson attack was a particularly sickening assault, not only on the Jewish community, but on the values we share as a society. The Hatzolah Volunteer Ambulance Corps is an extraordinary service whose sole mission is to protect life, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, Mervis added on a post in X. Health Secretary Wes Streeting said Monday morning that 4 replacement ambulances will be provided until permanent replacements can be found, according to the BBC, saying the attack struck at the heart of London's Jewish community. Labour MP for Finkley and Golders Green, Sarah Sackman, called for the perpetrators of what she said was a despicable, cowardly anti-Semitic arson attack in her area on a post on X to feel the full force of the law. The number of anti-Semitic incidents reported in Britain has surged since the Israel-Hamas war began in late 2023, including attacks on synagogues. The Community Security Trust, a British charity that works to protect the country's Jewish population, recorded 3,700 incidents in 2025, compared with 1,662 in 2022. In October, 2 people were killed and 3 seriously injured when a man rammed a car into a crowd and stabbed people at a synagogue in Manchester, England, in what police declared a terrorist attack. About 15,000 people live in Golders Green, half of whom are Jewish, according to a 2021 census data. Next, we have ICE deployed to some U.S. airports as long security lines persist during partial shutdown, written by Leslie Joseph, published by CNBC. But give me water to take a sip, because my mouth is getting dry. All right. New York. Andrea Leonard showed up at John F. Kennedy International Airport at 4:45 a.m. on Monday for his 7 a.m. flight to Seattle. Nearly 2 hours later, he made it through security and to his gate just in time for boarding. "I fly out of this terminal all the time, and this is insane," said Leonard, a 34-year-old performing arts teacher in New York who was en route to Seattle ahead of a family vacation to Hawaii. He is one of tens of thousands of travelers around the U.S. who are facing extra long security wait times at major airport hubs such as Atlanta, New York, and Houston due to elevated absences of Transportation Security Administration officers. TSA workers are facing a second missed full paycheck this week as a partial government shutdown continues. The Trump administration on Monday deployed Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents to several U.S. airports. White House border czar Tom Homan said Sunday that the administration would send ICE agents to airports on Monday to help ease the security lines amid the Department of Homeland Security shutdown. DHS blamed Democrats for the shutdown and travel problems in an emailed statement to CNBC. "This pointless, reckless shutdown of our Homeland Security workforce has caused more than 400 TSA officers to quit and thousands to call out from work because they are not able to afford gas, childcare, food, or rent," the department said. DHS and TSA didn't immediately respond to a request for comment on how many ICE agents would be deployed, where, and what their duties will be. Homan told CNN's State of the Union on Sunday that the ICE agents will be helping TSA move those lines along, including by guarding exit doors to relieve TSA agents so they could screen travelers. "We're simply there to help TSA do their jobs in areas that don't need their specialized experience." TSA's more than 50,000 officers have been working without their regular paychecks since the partial government shutdown began in mid-February. The shutdown comes as Democrats in Congress demand changes to how federal immigration enforcement operates in exchange for releasing DHS funding after 2 U.S. citizens were shot and killed by officers in Minneapolis. Hundreds of TSA officers have quit since the shutdown started, according to their union, the American Federation of Government Employees. Members of the travel industry, including airline executives, have blasted lawmakers for failing to pay essential government workers during repeated shutdowns that have snarled travel. In early 2019 and in late 2025, 2 federal government shutdowns ended shortly after travel disruptions escalated following higher than typical absences of air traffic controllers. Their pay isn't affected by this impasse. New York's LaGuardia Airport was closed on Monday morning following a collision of an Air Canada regional jet and an emergency vehicle on Sunday night. Some passengers told CNBC they had switched to fly out of Kennedy because of the disruptions. The Federal Aviation Administration issued a short ground stop at Newark Liberty International Airport in New Jersey on Monday morning after air traffic controllers evacuated the tower because of a burning smell coming from an elevator, adding to travel chaos around New York City. In our last article of the day, an update on Iran. Trump says Iran talks striking Iran's power plants for 5 days during productive conversations. Written and published by NPR staff. President Trump says the United States is negotiating with Iran to end the war now in its fourth week. Iran denied having talks. Speaking to reporters Monday, Trump U.S. objectives include Iran halting the enrichment of uranium for its nuclear program and the U.S. removing the enriched uranium Iran already has. If this happens, it's a great start for Iran to build itself back, and it's everything that we want, Trump told reporters on Monday. He said it would be a great deal for Israel as well as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Kuwait and Bahrain. I am all over the place. There is no dialogue between Tehran and Washington, Iran's foreign ministry said, according to the country's state broadcaster. It said Trump's earlier social media post touting productive conversations with Tehran were meant to calm energy markets and gain time to carry out his military plans. Major stock indices surged and oil prices dropped on the news. The Iranian Speaker of Parliament also denied there are talks. Here's what else to know about the latest developments in the conflict. Iranian officials warned Monday that if the U.S. attacks Iran's power plants, Iran would retaliate against energy and water infrastructure across the Gulf region, including in countries that host U.S. military bases. In a separate statement, Iran's Defense Council said non-belligerent countries could only transit through the Strait of Hormuz through coordination with Iran, and warned that any attack on Iran's coast or islands would trigger mine-laying across Gulf sea lanes that could effectively block maritime traffic beyond the narrow strait. U.S. Central Command Commander Admiral Brad Cooper said Monday that the Strait of Hormuz is physically open, but argued ships are staying away because Iran was firing missiles and drones at vessels. Cooper made the comments in an interview with Iran International, a London-based Persian news outlet. Cooper said the U.S. campaign in Iran is ahead or on plan, saying that Iran's military capabilities are deteriorating. He also accused Iran of increasingly targeting civilians across the Middle East. They're operating in a sign of desperation. In the last couple of weeks, they've attacked civilian targets very deliberately, more than 300 times, Cooper said. International Energy Agency head warns global economy faces major threat. Fatih Birol, the head of the International Energy Agency, warned Monday that the global economy faces a major threat from the war's disruption to oil and gas flows. No country will be immune to the effects of this crisis if it continues to go in this direction, Birol said, speaking to Australia's National Press Club in Canberra Monday. He added the situation is very severe. At least 40 energy facilities across 9 countries have also been severely damaged in the conflict. Birol said the current situation was worse than the combined oil crisis of 1973 and 1979, which together lost 10 million barrels per day. And today, only as of today, we lost 11 million barrels per day, so more than 2 major oil shocks put together, he said. Birol said the IEA was consulting with governments in Europe, Asia, North America, and the Middle East about releasing more stockpiles of oil, in addition to the historic 400 million barrels of oil released earlier this month. And that is all for the news today. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you come back tomorrow to get another daily news update. Thank you.